What's going on, guys? We're back with part 3 of our performance series with my friend Dr. Ian McKeown. Now, if you haven't looked at part 1 or part 2, make sure to check them out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about all things hamstring injuries. Athletes of all kinds, and not even just athletes, people suffer from a wide variety of hamstring injuries, and there's always a lot of debate on, well, how do I come back from that? How quickly should I graduate back into this? Now, we do have to say, neither of us are medical doctors, right? So you always want to make sure that you've gotten checked out by a physician and a physio, and you've gotten cleared, but we're going to give you some concrete tips and strategies. Now, to give you context, Dr. McKeown manages athletes that run up to 20 miles per hour for as many as 15 kilometers or 10 miles or more in the course of a game. So he's a perfect person to talk to about this stuff because he deals with it. Ian, appreciate your time, man.
My pleasure, man. Really good to be here.
Listen, there's as much debate about this stuff as I do. There's so many little witch doctor protocols out there, right? Like, oh, you should do this. And we have a lot of overzealous athletes that feel like, oh, I don't want to get behind. I've got injured. We have parents that feel like, oh, Susie can't miss this. We've got to get her going. We can't wait 6 weeks. When you think of some common issues or some common remedies even, what do people really need to know if they've hurt their hamstring today? What needs to be addressed? Is there a first point you'd start with?
Yeah, well, look, I think for me, it's always about moving early. You absolutely got to make sure you're respecting the injury and trauma that you've had at that period of time. That's absolutely true. But what you need to do is you need to start progressively loading as soon as you possibly can. There's plenty of research out there now, and some of it's really relatively aggressive about how you should be moving. I think with that, it's about making sure that you let pain be your guide. Don't necessarily think that pain is detrimental and that's
right.
The end of it. That's not catastrophic.
You're going to have some pain, right? Because for people watching, what exactly has happened if they've pulled or strained a hamstring? Just for people that don't have this background, what's going on typically?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of bleeding going on. It's probably the first
internally.
Internally,
yeah.
What's going to happen? Yeah, so you're gonna have swelling in there. You're going to be stiff. You're going to be sore. Even you'll find that blood might pool, behind the knee or wherever you're resting. So you've got to be able to get rid of that. That fluid before you even start to think about.
And that's why you want to move. You said move early, move often is the first point.
Yeah.
So we have internal bleeding per this strain.
Yeah.
Something that many people probably wouldn't have known, right? They just think, oh, I feel this soreness. They don't know about the inflammation and the swelling. So we've got to move to make sure that we clear that and we increase the circulation, right?
Yeah.
To that point, should they take, if I pulled my hamstring today, should I take the anti-inflammatories? Or do you want the body to work through its natural process first?
Absolutely. You want to make sure that you're working through that process as best as you possibly can. That means, the body's the best remedy. Making sure that you're letting it deal with its natural processes and making sure that you're setting yourself up to be able to adapt to the next stimulus.
Movement is medicine. So within that, still point number 1, great, I need to move. How much, right? Because if I hear that, and I know me as a high school athlete, I would have been like, all right, so-and-so said I got to go move. Now I'm going to sprint 3 times a week, even if it hurts. You said pain be your guide, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But how much, how many days, how many hours, how many minutes should I be moving? Because that stuff's overwhelming for people.
I think the first thing is never go by a timeline. Never go by a calendar, never go by a clock. Always make sure that it's by pain, by making sure that it's a movement category, which you want to make sure to do.
Yeah.
So, quite literally, you've heard all your life, making sure that you can walk before you can run. Exactly.
Right.
Here, okay?
Build the capacity.
Yeah. Make sure you can walk pain-free before you start to do anything. Once you can walk pain-free, can I squat body weight? Can I sit down on this bench? Can I get back up again? Okay, that's good.
Because those are daily activities, right? Because some people might be like, well, what does squatting or lunging have to do with me running? I'm trying to run, right? Maybe they have a soccer showcase or something else. But you're saying, hey, test the ranges of motion in which you might be pain-free or still exhibiting pain with simple movements first.
Yeah, well, you're controlling it, so you're not adding any chaotic movements. So you're absolutely able to control the amplitude of the movement, so how much range you're getting through a joint. But then you're also, and if you take that to where the bleeding, where you're trying to remodel tissue, you're trying to make all these lines appear back, these highways of muscle, you want to make sure that you are on the right track. So the earlier you can put that in place, and the better ways in which you can do that are with things which are unchaotic, with things which you can control, whether it's how far down you go. Oh no, that's too far, that hurts.
Too deep, yeah, you might have stretched it too much.
Don't go there. When you're doing anything with a hip hinge when you're doing anything with a lunge, or you go into single leg, which adds rotation capabilities. All those types of things, they're all small but measured steps along the way. So as you're going through it, use that analogy of being able to walk before you can run. Adding in, going double leg to single leg, from isometric or standing still and static to movement, and into faster movement, bigger movements. It's all perfectly logical, and it should all make sense along a continuum. And it's just about making sure that you are ticking off those things. And what you'll find is, after you're walking pain-free, and maybe the next day, you'll not only just be able to squat, okay, and that's that day. You might be able to skip along 3 or 4 different things, which might be the ability to hinge, the ability to lunge, the ability to bridge your hips up. All these different types of things, they all kind of come in clumps and clusters, but the more information you have on that then sets you up for the next step. And
it's like a recipe, right? Like, it's just like if you're going to modify a recipe, don't change 20 things. Yeah. Change one, see how it tastes, right? Yeah. Like when we're cooking, right? Follow that.
Yeah, you're always going to make sure you see how it tastes. So you're always going back, recalibrating your brain, recalibrating the program based upon, okay, was that sore? Was that safe? Did I feel okay?
Right.
Because you will find that you might find that things are sore or not sore, but you might feel, I just don't feel confident. Particularly as you get further down the continuum, you've got to make sure that your confidence in your body is right there.
Now, this one might tie into point number 2, where you said let pain be your guide, but I also think there's this move early, move often. There's a lot of people that feel like, man, I strained my hamstring, or I pulled my hamstring, I need to stretch it. Why is that a misnomer? Why should people, no matter what age or who did it, why do they need to refrain from stretching that too soon after that injury, or just in general?
Yeah, well, I love the analogy of, you're just picking off scabs. So
when you're stretching.
When you're stretching.
Yeah.
It's a pretty gross one, but everyone's done it. Everyone's been the kid that's skinned their knees, and then they start picking, they let it heal, and then they pick at it, and then it bleeds again. It's exactly the same thing. You've got a wound in there. You've got something which is trying to heal. It's trying to remodel itself. It's smart enough to do this, but if every 30 minutes, every day,
cranking on it,
and we're going to a position which is unsafe or is beyond the capabilities at that time, then you're just going to end up picking a scab, and eventually it will heal. But it's going to end up a little bit more scarred, or a little bit not as perfect. Everyone's got those scars from when you're a kid.
Right.
That's exactly where it's coming from.
Because you've taken this tissue, right, and you've essentially taken it beyond its normal capacity. So like you said, these fibers no longer run as they should, right? They've been stretched or torn. There's an injury. There's a wound. So just stretching that more, you're just continuing to do the same thing that was the mechanism of injury in a manner of speaking, right? Doesn't mean you shouldn't stretch. It just means after the injury, right, not the best thing to do. Now, letting pain be your guide, right? Again, let's say I've done these movements, right? Sally, Susie, Tommy, Jimmy, whoever the kid is or the individual, or even if it's a parent or an athlete, world-class athlete, they can squat, they can stand, they can sit, they can walk, they can jog. My God, it's feeling a little bit better. You continue to let pain be your guide. Like on a 1 to 10 scale, what level of pain should really frighten me? Because pain's not always a bad thing, is it? It's always it's a warning sign.
No, well, it's got to be your guide. You can't go, okay, well, I haven't had any pain and I just keep going. Like that, you're going to have to find where that pain tolerance is, or where that threshold is, just to get as you said, as you're building the recipe, as you're building the cake or the pot of chili, whatever it happens to be, you're going to have to be able to just listen in a little bit carefully, and that's where pain is the perfect message in which your body's trying to give you, and going, hey, that's enough. Okay, that's where you're at today. That's exactly what you want. So it takes you right through until the end of a rehab process.
But you deal with world-class athletes, right? Like, and we hear a lot about mental toughness and all these things. So what about the athlete that says, yeah, it hurts, but I can go through it? And they think they're being like virtuous, right? Or a hard worker because they're going to grind or whatever now, right? Like, where's the falsehood in that thing? Because some people, and there's a sport coach watching this right now that's saying, I'm hearing some fancy dude, right, from Belfast who works in Australia tell us that pain's his guide, but I need mentally tough players that can push through pain. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm a big advocate for that. But I also think that, I actually know that whenever you get to a certain speed, you'll just never be able to get there. Your body is too smart, and you're not going to be able to...
It'll shut it down for you, no matter how tough you are.
The amount of force that you need to produce in a synchronous way at 9 meters per second is so acute, and the timing and the sequentialness of it is so high that if you can't get that right, and you will not be able to do that with some sort of apparent movement. So that's exactly where you're coming from, and you'll get to a certain point, and we've got guys that can muscle through, and you'll muscle through the first 3 weeks of an injury, but then whenever you go to return to play, and you've got to go top speed, or you've got to go whenever you don't choose to, but that your opponent does, you're done.
There's a randomness there, and they might be able to push through and tough it out for a while.
Yeah.
But as we know, the greatest predictor of future injury is previous injury. Yeah. So what I always tell coaches is like, hey, yeah, they can tough it out, but just understand like how long do you want their career to last? Because if we take them too far too soon now, then this is just going to be a recurring thing. And many of them don't understand that. They think it is just a wound or a scab that, oh, once it's good, we're good. No. There's a high recurrence of that happening again. Now, you mentioned force and producing force, and it's just physics, right? A lot of force has to be produced to get people to run 20 plus miles an hour. What role does strength play, getting stronger? And kind of speak to it, Ian, on the standpoint of like with athletes, but also the everyday Joe that hasn't really done strength training that's like, what? Like how does doing stuff in the weight room help me with this? Can you walk us through that just a little bit, a high level overview?
Yeah, well, sure. It's a functional strength for an athlete. The function is being able to be super strong because of the ability to hit grinds at X amount of force. With your everyday Joe, it's a functional strength. It's the ability to go up and down the stairs.
Still relative.
It's the ability to go for a hike. Yeah, it's absolutely relative. No matter what that happens to be, you've got to have the strength, the prerequisite strength to be able to cope with that.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely crucial. And what I would recommend is that the force of the strength of the player or the program in which you're trying to put together, it actually precedes what happens in terms of running. Now,
what do you mean by that? Just slow that down.
Whenever you're talking about being able to walk before you can run,
yeah.
I want you to have, say from a hinge point of view or from a body weight bridge point of view, you have to be able to be strong enough to cope with
certain benchmarks
before you go into a locomotive exercise, which is when you're moving and you've got one leg in front of another. The amount of control and strength you need to be able to, we maybe don't appreciate that, but whenever you're injured, it is a very, very difficult task. And that's what we want to make sure that we have built that up very, very early. And that is crucial. So being able to isolate, being able to target, posterior chain or your hamstring.
Glutes, hamstring, erector complex, yeah.
Everything. It's so important that you're making sure that you have a return to strength, which is probably a little bit further along than maybe your running ability at that.
And paying attention to range of motion, right? Like I think one big thing people miss is they think, oh, my right hamstring's injured, I can't do anything. Well, no, you can do tons of stuff on that single leg RDL, single leg bridge, and then you can even start to incorporate some stuff, floor-based hamstring movements, even riding a bike. Like you said, move early, move often. Don't just shut it down, right? Like find low-level ways of letting pain be your guide so that muscle, because as it contracts, it produces blood flow. Yeah. As it produces blood flow, nutrients are sent to the tissue, right? And that's why we're saying don't even ice right away, because sadly, and I don't think the general public understands this, there's a lot of people that work in the NFL, AFL, NCAA, NBA, high-level sport, that a lot of these people just, oh, you're hurt, stim and ice. Yeah. It's like, no, even ice will retard the recovery process, move, blood flow. So you're saying strength train are, within your limitations, right? Like it might be changing the range of motion. It might be doing single leg at one point in time, but there's always a way that getting stronger is going to help on both ends of the spectrum before injury, right? As a way to mitigate the risk. And on the other end.
Absolutely. And I think like my point to further that would be actually not only move with strength or be strong, it's also move better. So you've moved often, you've moved early, you've moved with strength, but then it's also moved better. So the reason that you've got a hamstring injury, yes, it could be down to training load, it could be down to the ability that you've just gone too fast. It could be down to a multitude, you've been pushed over in an awkward position and mechanically you've strained your hamstring. There's so many different reasons. But what it does is it typically gives you this opportunity, and in my experience, particularly working in AFL, where we've got guys that are running an awful long distance and pretty quickly, and changing direction and jumping and getting tackled and all these different things, is there's typically strength qualities which they might have lost in
training because they're hurt and they compensate.
Even just through the preseason or the in-season period when they're playing games and you're in that cycle of things, this is when these things happen. So if you are in that position, maybe doing things like, you know, lying hip abduction, where, you know, you're like clam type positions, or you're working on like, where are your glutes? You know, the glutes are a massive part of hamstring, you know, prevention. You know, the load, the transference of load through those is crucial. Calves, you know, with these guys, you know, can you do single leg calf raises? How many can you get? Can you get 12?
Yeah, because what are those benchmarks are tough, right? Because I can read it in the comments now.
Yeah.
People watching this will say, oh, he talked about strength and where you should be on an RDL or a deadlift or a Nordic or whatever. But it's hard because, and we've talked about this before, the benchmarks kind of change. You'd love to say, hey, if you deadlift 2 times body weight, or you can do this amount of Nordics, or you can do a Nordic with this amount of force, you're pure and clear. And we've seen researchers put that kind of research out, but it's still fairly tenuous, right? Because you have to look at, well, that's not true across all populations, or what we call fascicle lengths, which are just part of the architecture of the body. You can't just narrow it down to, hey, if this, then that, because there are so many different things. Even the position you play is going to matter. Your body weight, right? So apples aren't always apples in this case, right? You just have to get stronger, move better, and move more frequent, and all these things, right? On that dimensional spectrum.
That's exactly it, and that's absolutely crucial. And what I feel like we miss out on is the ability to move better.
Yeah.
With you know our hips, our posture, the positions we get into, we lose these qualities over time. And you know, as an example, you're talking about bench pressing, bench marking, what we're trying to do. And you know, if you've got guys that you're expecting them to do maybe 2 hours of training, but they can't do 30 single leg calf raises, and they're on their feet for this whole 2 hour session, maybe accumulating 8, 9, 10 Ks, maybe 5 miles. You know, that's a long time. That's a lot of ability that they need to be able to have, or capability that they need to have. And if they've lost it systemically in one joint, they're going to compensate somewhere else. And it might be in a hamstring injury, it might be in a calf strain, it might be wherever.
Any of those things.
It might just be tiredness, and then they absolutely fatigue, and then they just crash. You know, there's all these different things which we need to be able to continue to develop while we are in this sort of holding pattern with the rehab program. Yeah,
and I think those are all things, guys, like to pay attention to. So many people want to know, how many sprints should I run? What distance? How should I... Listen to what Ian's saying. Like, before you do that, just start with some simple things. Get stronger. Make sure you're moving frequently. Make sure you're paying attention to your posture and your positions. This ties into a lot of that falsehood of mental toughness. If you just try to grind through it, you're going to fall out of the positions you should be in. You're going to have bad form, and then it's just going to increase your risk of injury even further. So, Ian, I know you got to run, man, but guys, make sure you listen to part 1, part 2, and part 3. You smash it. You're always welcome, man, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise.
No, thanks for having me, man. It's been brilliant.
Likewise.